The cranberry sauce dish slipped from my hand in slow motion as my father's words cut through the Thanksgiving chatter, not the dish falling, that I caught. What I couldn't catch was the way every conversation at the table died mid-sentence, 23 relatives turning to watch him deliver my execution with surgical precision. "Evelyn is a complete disappointment to this family," he announced, his voice carrying that particular tone he used for business presentations. "While Crystal builds something meaningful, you waste your life on computer nonsense. Pack your things after dinner. I won't have a failure living under my roof." My mother reached for her wine glass. Her only reaction, Crystal's fork paused halfway to her mouth, eyes gleaming with something that looked like satisfaction. The turkey centerpiece suddenly felt like a monument to everything I'd never be in their eyes. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't mention the 7-figure consulting contract I'd signed that morning, or the tech company acquisition offer sitting in my inbox, or the penthouse lease I'd been planning to tell them about over dessert. I simply stood, smoothed the napkin across my lap one final time, and walked toward the coat closet while my aunt whispered something about "always knew she wouldn't amount to much." The November air hit my face like a reset button, and somewhere between their front porch and my car, something fundamental shifted in my chest, not breaking, crystallizing. 3 weeks later, I owned everything they thought they controlled. Before I tell you how, tell me where you're listening from so I know I'm not the only one who's survived this particular kind of family math, where love gets subtracted every time you don't fit their equation. My name is Evelyn Nash, I'm 34, and I'm a cybersecurity architect. This is the story of how I stopped trying to decode people who'd already decided I was the error in their system. If you'd seen the Nash family from the outside, we looked like we'd been photoshopped into the perfect life template. My parents, Richard and Patricia, ran their social circle like a board meeting. Calculated, polished, always performing for an audience that consisted of everyone except the people actually sitting at their table. I learned early that I was the wrong kind of daughter. Too quiet during cocktail parties, too focused on building instead of performing, too interested in solving problems my parents didn't think were worth solving. Crystal, 18 months younger, was everything they'd ordered from central casting. Charismatic, conventionally ambitious, fluent in the language of appearances. While Crystal took ballroom dancing and practiced her presence, I stayed up until 3 a.m. teaching myself penetration testing and network architecture. At 16, when she was winning Junior Miss Portland, I was getting paid to find security vulnerabilities for a startup. My parents called it that hacker hobby and told their friends I was still figuring things out. When I dropped out of college sophomore year to join a security firm full-time, they stopped mentioning me at their dinner parties entirely. The firm went public 3 years later. I made my first million at 24. They asked me once if I was still doing that computer stuff and changed the subject when I said yes. By the time I turned 30, I'd built a reputation that made Fortune 500 companies nervous and governments interested. I consulted on infrastructure projects that would make my father's commercial real estate deals look like monopoly money. Crystal had become a lifestyle influencer with 50,000 Instagram followers and an online boutique that sold overpriced candles. According to my parents, Crystal was the success story. I was the cautionary tale they'd somehow failed to prevent. That Thanksgiving wasn't unusual. It was just the first time they'd said the quiet part at full volume. The disapproving looks, the dismissive comments, the way they seated me at the far end of the table, like a distant cousin nobody wanted to claim. It had been happening in smaller doses my entire life. What cracked something open wasn't the public humiliation. I'd survived worse. It was the certainty in their voices, the absolute conviction that they knew my life better than I did, despite having never once asked me a real question about my work. The drive back to Seattle that night took nearly 3 hours through holiday traffic. My apartment felt like stepping into a different dimension. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, minimalist furniture I'd chosen myself, server racks humming quietly in the spare bedroom I used as a home office. everything I'd built without their permission, their approval, their belief that I could. But their voices followed me home anyway, burrowing into old wounds I thought I'd sealed with success and distance. The real unraveling started 4 days later. The days after Thanksgiving felt weirdly muted, like someone had turned down the contrast on reality. I went through my normal routine: client meetings, code reviews, a security audit for a healthcare network that would affect 3 million patient records. But my mind kept drifting back to that table, to the casual cruelty in my father's voice, to the way my mother hadn't even flinched. Then my phone lit up with a text from Mason, my cousin on my mom's side, the only person in that family who'd ever treated me like I had a functioning brain. "Ev, your mom's telling people you're basically homeless in Seattle. Said your internet thing collapsed and you're crashing on friends' couches while you figure out your next move." I stared at the message for a full minute, standing in my kitchen with its marble counters and imported espresso machine, and something cold settled behind my ribs. They hadn't just thrown me out. They were rewriting my story, cementing their narrative before I could contradict it. I texted back, "I have a 2,400 square foot penthouse." Mason's response came fast. "I know. They don't want to know." That phrase hit different than the lie itself. They didn't want to know. Knowing would mean admitting they'd been wrong for a decade, that everything they'd mocked had turned into something they couldn't dismiss. 2 days later, the situation escalated from insulting to criminal. An email appeared in my inbox from a law firm in Portland, Whitmore and Associates, one of those old money outfits my father loved name-dropping. Subject line: confirmation required, guarantor status verification. Guarantor for what? The attachment referenced a commercial renovation loan, approximately $425,000, taken out 26 months earlier. According to their records, I was listed as the guarantor. Secondary documentation showed the loan was tied to Crystal's boutique renovation and some family property improvements. I'd never signed anything for them. I wouldn't have. But there it was. A scanned document with my signature, my social security number, my Seattle address from 2 years ago. They must have pulled it from old tax documents or family paperwork before I'd moved to the penthouse, back when I'd foolishly shared my new address during one of those forced family dinners where they pretended to care about my life for exactly 5 minutes. I pulled up the signature comparison software I used for forensic consulting work. Took me 90 seconds to spot the inconsistencies. The capital E in Evelyn didn't match my actual signature pattern. The pen pressure was wrong. Someone had practiced, but not enough. They'd forged my name on a $500,000 loan. I sat there in the blue light of my monitors, my coffee going cold, connecting dots I should have seen coming. The timing made perfect sense now. The loan was entering default territory just as they were escalating their campaign to paint me as unstable, unreliable, professionally failed. If everything collapsed, they'd need a scapegoat. They hadn't just humiliated me at Thanksgiving. They'd stolen my financial identity, and the performance at dinner was stage setting for the fraud. The anger came later. First came something colder, clearer. The same focused calm I felt when I found a critical vulnerability in a client's system. That night, I stopped trying to understand them and started treating this like what it was, a security breach that required containment. I forwarded everything to my attorney in Seattle by 9 p.m. She called back within an hour. "Evelyn, this isn't sloppy family drama. This is wire fraud, identity theft. We're looking at federal charges if you want to pursue that route. What are my other options?" Document everything, file reports with credit agencies, and wait to see if they try to enforce the guarantor clause when the loan defaults, which according to these payment records should happen in the next 30 to 45 days. I pulled up the loan documentation again, scanning the terms. What happens to the secured assets if it defaults? A pause. Technically, the lender can seize or sell, but if a qualified buyer wanted to acquire the debt before default, I'm qualified. You're overqualified. If you want to take over the loan, I can start the paperwork. It's aggressive, but it's legal. I looked out at the Seattle skyline, watching the lights reflect off the water. Do it. That decision wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that when everything unraveled, and it would unravel, I controlled the outcome instead of getting dragged down with them. Over the next 2 weeks, my legal team moved quietly. We positioned an LLC to acquire the debt if default triggered, which gave me leverage over the property and financial decisions tied to it. Nothing vindictive, just protective. If they'd pulled me into their mess without permission, I'd make sure I had the controls when it imploded. During those 2 weeks, not one person from my family called. Not to apologize, not to explain, not even to lie more convincingly. The silence was almost elegant. They were so certain I was powerless that they didn't bother checking if anything had changed. By the 3rd week, my attorney confirmed it. The loan's entering default. Your LLC is first in line for acquisition. Once it processes, you effectively own the debt and the assets securing it. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling that same crystalline clarity from the night they threw me out. 3 weeks ago, they told me to go live in the streets. Now I was about to own the ground they stood on. The default triggered on a Tuesday morning. My attorney's email was characteristically efficient. Acquisition complete. You now control the debt and all associated assets. Advise on next steps. I sat in my home office watching fog roll across the bay and thought about what I actually wanted from this. Not humiliation. I wasn't them. Not destruction. That wouldn't fix anything. Just boundaries so clear they couldn't pretend to misunderstand them. Draft a notice, I told her. Give them 2 options. Sell the property and resolve the debt cleanly, or enter a structured rental agreement under new ownership. Make it fair but firm. No loopholes. And when they ask who the new owner is, let them figure it out. The call came from Mason 3 days later, his voice tight with something between warning and disbelief. He'd heard the panic from his mother, my aunt, who'd gotten a frantic call from Patricia about some mysterious investment group threatening to take everything. Ev, Crystal's losing it. Your parents think some investment group is coming after them. They're panicking about losing the house. They have no idea it's you. Good, I said. Set up a meeting. Tell them the acquiring party wants to discuss terms. Friday, 7 p.m., Harborview Restaurant, private room. They're going to freak out. They should have thought about that before they forged my signature. Friday arrived with Seattle's signature winter drizzle, the kind that makes everything look softened and serious at once. I got to Harborview early, my attorney beside me. The private room was understated. Wooden table, pendant lighting, windows overlooking the marina. Nothing aggressive, nothing theatrical. Just a space where truth could finally take up room. When the door opened, my mother came in first, her perfect composure cracking at the edges. My father followed, jaw set in that particular way that meant he was about to negotiate. Crystal trailed behind, mascara slightly smudged, radiating defensive anger. They didn't see me at first. They were looking for someone in a suit, someone official. When they finally registered who was sitting at the head of the table, my mother actually gasped. "Evelyn?" My father's voice was tight. "What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Nash, Mr. Nash." My attorney stood, gesturing to the seats across from us. "Please sit. Ms. Nash is the acquiring party. She now controls your defaulted loan." The silence that followed had weight to it, like atmospheric pressure changing. Crystal found her voice first. "You bought our debt. What the hell is wrong with you?" "You forged my signature," I said quietly. "That's what's wrong." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "We were going to tell you, we just needed—" "You needed a scapegoat when it failed," I interrupted. "That's why you spent 3 weeks telling everyone I was homeless and unstable. You were building your defense." My father's face went from red to pale. "You have no idea what kind of pressure we were under. Crystal's business needed—" "Crystal's business isn't my responsibility. My financial identity is." My attorney slid 2 folders across the table. "These are your options. Option 1. Sell the property within 60 days. Proceeds will cover the debt in full, and you'll walk away with approximately $180,000 after fees. Option 2. Ms. Nash assumes ownership and you remain as tenants under a structured lease agreement. Market rate, standard terms. We have to rent our own house. My mother's voice cracked. It's not your house anymore, I said. It stopped being your house when you used my name without permission to secure a loan you couldn't afford. Crystal leaned forward, her face contorted. You're destroying our family over money? You're rich. You don't even need this. You're right, I said. I don't need the house or the money. What I need is my name removed from legal documents I never signed. What I need is for you to understand that actions have consequences, even when you're used to avoiding them. My father tried a different angle, his voice dropping into that reasonable tone he used to use when I was a kid. Evelyn, we're still your family. Surely we can work something out that doesn't involve lawyers and contracts. You involved lawyers and contracts when you forged my signature. I'm just responding appropriately. My mother started crying then, not the quiet, dignified tears she used at charity events, but something rawer. How can you do this to us? We raised you. I let that sit in the air for a moment before answering. You raised me to understand that success requires accountability. You taught me that words have meaning and contracts matter. You spent 30 years telling me I wasn't living up to your standards. I learned. My attorney added, you have 7 days to decide. After that, we proceed with option 2 by default. The meeting ended without resolution, just shock, anger, and the slow realization that I wasn't negotiating. As they stood to leave, Crystal stopped at the door. I actually needed that money, she whispered. The boutique was supposed to... Then you should have asked me, I said, instead of stealing from me. Would you have helped? I met her eyes. I guess you'll never know. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since Thanksgiving. My attorney started packing up the documents. How do you feel? Tired, I admitted, but clear. Outside, the rain had picked up, drumming steadily against the restaurant windows. I watched the marina lights blur through the water, feeling something shift that had been stuck for decades. They called it family. I called it finally setting boundaries they couldn't ignore. The 7 days passed in silence. No calls, no emails, no sudden attempts at reconciliation. My attorney sent updates as they came in. They'd consulted with their own lawyer, explored options that didn't exist, and slowly accepted that there was no loophole big enough to crawl through. On day 6, the decision arrived. They chose to sell. It was the smart choice, the clean exit. The sale closed within 45 days, cleared the debt completely, released my name from every document, and left them with enough money to downsize into a condo in Beaverton. Nobody ended up on the street. Nobody was destroyed. They just had to live within their actual means for the first time in years. Crystal's boutique closed within a month. Without the steady flow of borrowed money, it couldn't sustain itself. She posted something vague on Instagram about new chapters and personal growth, never mentioning why the old chapter ended so abruptly. Last I heard through Mason, she'd moved in with a friend in Portland and was working as a social media manager for a local marketing firm, finally earning money instead of burning through it. My parents withdrew from their social circles, quietly replaced by other people with better stories to tell. The curated image they'd built, the successful family, the perfect daughters, the enviable life, dissolved like it was never real to begin with. Mason stayed in touch with me. He'd always been caught between loyalty to his mother and disgust at what his aunt and uncle had done. But after everything settled, he made his choice clear. We meet for coffee when I'm in Portland now, and he's careful never to mention them unless I ask first. That kind of respect means more than he probably knows. 6 months after that confrontation, I returned to my normal life. The life I'd built without their permission. For the first time, my success wasn't something I carried in silence or defended against their skepticism. It was just my reality, unbothered by whether they acknowledged it. I haven't spoken to my parents or Crystal since that dinner at Harborview. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. But the thing about that silence is that it doesn't hurt anymore. It just is. I built a life that isn't shaped by their expectations, their judgments, or their rewritten stories. A life where my worth isn't up for debate at Thanksgiving dinner or any other time they feel like performing their disappointment. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's choosing peace so decisively that nothing chaotic can follow you home. If any part of this story felt familiar, the dismissal, the rewriting of your reality, the casual cruelty disguised as family dynamics, you're not alone. And if you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, I hope my story reminds you that it's allowed. You're allowed to choose yourself, even when the people who raised you never chose you. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe if this resonated, and stick around for what's coming next.